Welcome to the Threat Insights weekly group meeting. To repeat what I just said, we have one issue on our agenda today, and it's from Savash, who unfortunately is not here. And this was an issue he created around some tech debt, and Jonathan has already participated in this conversation, so I'll let him sort of explain the concept for us.
Right. We've actually had a lot of conversations in an issue that was open previously to this one as well. It's pretty similar in terms of the fact that we have this vulnerabilities call, and it only returns the vulnerabilities that are set up in the security dashboard, which is not what you might expect if you want to include the projects. And it was throwing me for a loop, and so I had opened up an issue to actually add in a filter based on groups and or projects, which is the same. It's basically a duplicate issue. Daniel had some suggestions in there as well on this one, but a lot of the conversation, the other one actually ended up around how we were going to name things, and I think Matt just got tired of that conversation as well. It's like, just name it something. But Savas suggested having one vulnerabilities call and getting rid of the project.vulnerabilities and the group.vulnerabilities and the pipeline security dashboard security report findings to have just one vulnerabilities call. Daniel had some input suggesting let's see, I'm trying to including group IDs, project IDs, pipeline IDs.
So one thing I want to add is, we're in the process of this migration of the pipeline vulnerability report to use GraphQL and shared components wherever possible. Today, we have to make the same changes in multiple places because those are totally different vulnerability lists, even though to the customer and the design vision, they'll be the same. So a lot of this is coming out of the fact that we have to treat findings and vulnerabilities very differently. The data looks different, even though from a UI and a customer perspective, they shouldn't be. So there's a very related discussion that took place a few weeks ago where we started to talk about Q3 debt and the priorities that we as a team would like to see addressed. So it was also in Slack, and I don't have that message. I think maybe it's in the issue handy, but this is the link here in the agenda to Savash's related description, which is on the one-to-many topic. After talking to Tiago about this, because the question that Savash had was, do we delay this conversion to GraphQL until we can unite the data behind findings and vulnerabilities so that we don't have to incur the debt of the conditionals in the front end that says if it's a finding, do this, if it's a vulnerability, do that. Tiago was concerned about the effort around doing that. And I think it was all wrapped into this one-to-many conversation, which I don't totally get, and he's not here to speak to.
Yep.
So.
My understanding is we're not doing anything with one-to-many at this point.
No, please don't. Please don't. Please don't.
He's like, no. Okay, I thought he was interjecting. It's like, oh no, we're doing this. And
no, please don't.
Oh God, no. Yeah.
Addressing this whole thing, I'd say we postpone this until we get rid of findings as much as possible.
Talk to me more about that, like getting rid of findings as much as possible. What do you mean? Can you elaborate on that, Michał?
The general plan, unless it has changed in the month I've not been kind of paying attention, was to keep the things that we show in the pipeline report. So like when you go to a pipeline, click on the security. These things are findings. We treat them as findings. If a user interacts with the finding, like I don't know, tries to dismiss it, creates an issue for it, we automatically promote it to vulnerability. So we will have a huge number of vulnerabilities and a smaller number of findings, which would be just the things that we show in the pipeline. That's for the short term.
And the other thing is that There actually, unless this pipeline is on the default pipeline, there are no findings. Everything comes from the report, unless it's the default pipeline. So that's one of the reasons why I was saying I don't think we can get rid of the pipeline security report findings, because it's not the findings themselves, it's the security report that's getting sent back.
Exactly. I believe we could unify the security center, group level security dashboard, and project security dashboard queries. The pipeline security dashboard query is probably going to have to remain a different query altogether. Group level and project level queries. I mean, we treat project as a namespace as well. So group level and project level could be treated as a namespace security dashboard. I know it's a different name, but project itself is a namespace, group itself is a namespace. We can determine if it's a group or if it's a project, and like limit the vulnerabilities returned either way. And the security center is basically instance-wide vulnerability report, if I recall correctly. So I think we could just unify those queries, but the pipeline security dashboard is going to have to remain a different query, since we do not have vulnerabilities persisted in the pipeline security tab. We just parse the report as Jonathan said.
So from a customer's perspective, they don't know the difference really between a finding and a vulnerability. And from the APIs and from the front end, I think the ultimate goal would be to have them delivered uniformly, right? So we don't have to modify the data a lot to display them uniformly, and so that the customer would see them in the same data sets. Does that seem accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I get that, and I, seeing, we want everything to be displayed the same. Just
basically, vulnerability object is a superset, like from the finding itself. So if we don't convert the findings to vulnerabilities, then we can't present everything uniformly, because some of the information is not available yet at this point. Until the user does any, like, interacts with the finding itself, like creating an issue, dismissing it, doing whatever to it, it's going to remain a finding. The only possible way for us to unify all of this would be to automatically create vulnerabilities and mark them as maybe not on default branch, so they wouldn't show up in the vulnerability report by default, which is the long-term goal, if I recall correctly.
And the downside is that if we do that, we are creating a absolute ton of vulnerabilities. Thinking about like the GitLab project. The other thing is that.
Well, hold on though, Jonathan. Can I ask you a question before you move on from that? With the one-to-many conversation, I think maybe this is where it comes in, because there's not a ton of vulnerabilities. There's a ton of findings, and there might be a lot of findings that point to one vulnerability, right? You find one vulnerability in multiple places in your code. So once they're distilled down to just the vulnerability set, it's not as large as if you had a unique vulnerability for every finding.
Not really, since
No,
let me. I think
What-
I think we're currently over 9 million findings.
but so that's what I'm talking about. Is we're not talking about findings, like unique vulnerabilities. Whereas if multiple findings pointed to one vulnerability, like depending on where they're at in the code or how they're found, but at the core they're pointing to one vulnerability, wouldn't that reduce that number considerably?
Yes and no.
And I'm still trying to track when we started talking about doing the one-to-many again.
The no comes from the fact that we are currently pretending there is one-to-one correspondence between a finding and a vulnerability. So if we like say, hey, we want to get rid of findings altogether, then we have to create vulnerability objects from these findings. So in short, we would be converting every single finding that doesn't have a vulnerability object yet to a vulnerability, because now we were pretending there is a one-to-one correspondence between the findings and vulnerabilities themselves. And the
Okay.
one to many discussion, it has been popping up very recently, and this is, I'd call it a technical debt at this point. Some decisions have been made in the past, which the initial idea of the vulnerability threat insights was to have multiple findings that could belong to single vulnerability. This has been maybe not scrapped, but abandoned. And the proposal was to not to change the database schema, just to pretend there is only one finding.
And to be completely honest, I'm not sure why this conversation got attached to this a few weeks ago. This is just where Savash brought this conversation out of Slack again, and that's why I pointed to it here. So I'm clearly out of my element at this point and not fully able to drive this conversation from the front end side. So I think at this point, Savash's issue is written more specific to what Mihao had said around being able to reduce the number of endpoints that we have, being able to unify the project group and security center. Sorry, I'm still struggling with the wording there. And the unification of findings and vulnerabilities is a different topic, I guess. If we leave the pipeline API the same, we just have the front end implementation is not as clean as it could be.
Right. I mean, and remember, we don't create findings for every pipeline. And so if we did, I really don't think that, again, if we were to pull a pipeline that's not a default pipeline, there's no associated IDs to anything. And so you wouldn't be able to, I mean, except for the finding UUID, I think that would be the only thing that gets pulled. And that's automatically generated.
So for the non-default branches, we read directly from the results of the analyzer, is what you're saying, Jonathan?
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
We pull those directly from the reports, not the actual database. The artifacts. We pull those from the artifacts.
But the front end doesn't have to know about that today, correct? From that's all handled in the backend API and how it's returned. Right. Okay.
So it would be a different set of data that comes back from those pipelines and that comes back for the vulnerabilities.
But from a pipeline report perspective, is the data from the findings in the default branch the same as the data of the findings in a non-default branch today?
Not
do you get the same data points? No. I mean, do you get the same like the same IDs?
Not necessarily, depending on location of the vulnerability. If it's changing the code, then it's not going to be a one-to-one.
That's not what I mean. Does the data look the same?
Does the data look the same?
I mean, do you get the same? I'm not asking my question well. From an API perspective, if I were to make a call to get findings for a default branch on project A versus finding from a non-default branch, totally unrelated in project B, like, do they have the same like signatures?
I would think so.
Okay. That's what I assume so as well. I'm just confirming.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you guys, I apologize. That, go ahead. Go ahead.
The whole data layout, data structure is like, it's nuts. I mean, so
here's a good opportunity for me to plug this idea that's going to be discussed in retro as well. There's a desire from the front end to understand this data better. Today, it's just sort of like shooting fish in a barrel. We're looking and we can look at the APIs and the definitions of them, but it'd be great to have a better explanation. And if somebody would be willing to put together a brown bag or a video that walks through some of the things that you're talking about, with maybe even some documentation around it, that would be really helpful. As the backend has a lot on their plate, the front end would like to be able to move forward with things that just require small amounts of backend changes, and this would really empower us to do that. So, not asking anyone on this call to do it right now. I know that this topic will come up again, but I'm just putting this out there that
right.
It's not very clear right now. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, at this moment, I was checking the database, and We have, sorry, I was wrong. We have 15 million vulnerabilities right now. So it keeps growing. So, and I think, Jonathan, that we are actually creating findings for non-default branches as well at this moment.
Are we really?
I am assuming yes, because this is growing way faster than I initially anticipated. Last time I checked, we were at 8 million, and I expected us to grow at a 1 million per month or something. And now we have 15 million findings and 14.5 million vulnerabilities. So it's not
Well-
exactly one-to-one correspondence, because not every finding was converted into a vulnerability at this point.
But I mean, we're not creating a vulnerability for each
Not yet.
non-default branch. So I mean that those numbers line up, that it would be a default branch that that would line up.
That will line up. The end
just
result
second.
for our, yep, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I second what Lindsay says too, because I would love like a picture or a diagram of this. 'Cause
Yeah.
I'm also
So
not
would I.
Yeah, I was thinking the
100%
same
clear
thing.
where
It's
some of
like,
these
yeah,
are.
somebody ought to do something. I think Mehmet did something with that a while back. I have to see if I can find it. He mapped out all the data structures on the back end. I don't know if we have we had an issue a long time ago to actually do something and write it all out, diagram it out, and we got the data layer diagrammed out, and it is a spaghetti code, like diagram. But no, that is something that we need to do, is to have some kind of flow diagram on how this is it's set up.
And it probably, I think it would be useful just to have something really high level, like not even necessarily going down to that data layer itself, but like almost like a decision tree, like if non-default branch pipeline, like what happens to it? You know, where does it get read from, that kind of level, just so you know where the data is coming from.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, I think y'all are definitely right on that. Shoot, it would help us on the back end to have that diagram, especially if we have someone else like, hey, how's all this stuff put together to especially new guys, and to be able to talk to that quickly.
Well, we do have our retrospective in 10 minutes, and I'm pretty sure that this is the only topic on it. So we should give anyone else who is planning on joining that, but not this discussion, the opportunity to attend that. Is there anything else for this instance of this meeting that anyone wants to bring up? Okay.
I had one thought on it, if nobody else has anything.
Go.
So I've seen, at least kind of on the product side, some steps in a direction that GitLab traditionally would have avoided, specifically about doing things that don't scale. So we've made a change to the handbook that says we need to be more thoughtful about it. And I think there's also a slight softening on this, microservices, call it philosophy. So I mentioned this to Tiago a week or two ago, and I didn't really want to bring it up in the next few iterations, since I know everybody is super busy with fires right now. But this idea that the findings and vulnerabilities, if we start storing everything in the database, is going to grow at apparently a geometric rate instead of a linear rate. Would it make sense for us to start considering breaking off basically the secure data store into something separate, much like we've got Elasticsearch backing our global search? Because I am kind of concerned about scalability. We want people to use this more and more and more and more. And if that's going to start causing problems with the rest of GitLab, maybe that's something we consider looking at, towards the back half of this year and then working on into next year. I don't know if that buys us anything or not, but I just want to kind of put that on the table. And that's it. Not looking for a response.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely worth something looking into on that one, because it almost feels like it's a beast in it to itself. It feels like it would compartmentalize away from a lot of the other sections of GitLab. It's just kind of its own little area.
And there's potential upsides too from like a compliance and audit perspective if we actually had, a separate database shard or another data store for it.
I know Mehmet was like, hey, let's use Cassandra. I think I heard that mentioned.
Yeah, there
around as
was
well.
the talk of getting a different database altogether, but this is a really long-term
Yeah.
solution to this.
I hear you like Kafka, Miho.
Good thing we're not going to leverage that, at least for .com. All right, one more thing, Jonathan. I found an issue that's 10 months old, created by Tiago, which
Okay.
is basically me saying that we do not persist things that are not in the default branch. And Mehmet corrects me that we have started sorting findings for all branches.
Where is that?
I'm going to copy and paste it into the chat on Zoom. This is 10 months old, which kind of explains that we are storing findings for not default branches. So that's what we are doing. And I'm trying, because at some point after joining, I recall myself doing a database diagram of things, but I cannot find it for, I have no idea why. It's somewhere, but it might be in a different project, not gitlab.org, -org, but somewhere else. And I cannot find it right now. So it might show up on the agenda later on. So please check it out later.
Yes. The security findings table to go along with the vulnerability occurrences table. So that's right. I remembered the security findings table. I wasn't including that because it's different. It's kind of like one of those same but different things. If I remember right, I have to look into that one a little bit more. But yeah, we are creating a security finding, which I think the security finding is like a stripped down version of a vulnerability finding.
This was created just to address some performance issues we've been having. So
Yeah.
This is getting out of hand.
So we have that too. Yeah, we have that as another part of our data structure in the back end too.
The two things, I'll try and share this video, but I've also been attempting to take notes. And you guys, I haven't even had coffee. I'm half awake. Please correct what I've said. And I've put your names in front of them. So like, please check the agenda and correct what I've said. The other thing is that up until very recently, up until this, well, I'd say maybe recently, I thought that we read all of the findings from the analyzer reports. I even did a commit presentation where I misspoke on that. So thanks for all this knowledge. I appreciate it. I wish I had been part of this conversation a month ago or two. And we're at the end of our time before leaving a little gap between retro. So I'm going to hit stop on the recording. Miho, I totally just cut you off. Did you have something else that you wanted to add?
No, not really.
Are you sure?
I found the link.
You found your diagram?
Yes, I found it. I'm gonna post it on the agenda.
Please share. I think that it's the beginning of what we need. I think we are going to need some more recent information. I hope if you did this that long ago, maybe we haven't changed things in the last year, Mia. Or I know that you guys are in the process of dealing with some debt right now, so a future vision would be good too. Cool. I'm gonna not just leave this in this Zoom chat link as well. Thanks, Miha.
Oh, managed to do that.
So happy.
All right.
Yeah, that diagram. Oof.
Yep.
a lot.
So that's about it, I guess.
Okay.
We have retrospective coming up, so